Hey guys, Zach here, Big Dog Motorcycles. Today we're working on a K9 that we are going to install a wiring kit. We will be installing a backbone harness, a full backbone harness for the Gen 1 RIP kits. We do have a 500 series RIP kit that we'll be installing. You'll get your wiring harness, you'll get your momentary switch, you'll get your new EHC, have a mounting bracket, as well as 2 sets of mounting hardware. Also will come with a wiring diagram for your colors for different turn signals, for your locators for each one of your indicators on your dashboard. Also, last but not least, we will be having your instructions that you will need to read thoroughly before you install your new kit. First off though, we need to figure out which one you have. A lot of people have already done some upgrades. So we have the Gen 1s, we have Gen 2s. We also have other companies installed harnesses. Wires Plus kit is a big one that's been out there, and they are discontinued all their products. However, we have to figure out what you have so I can send you the right part out. So with that being said, Wires Plus kits have different styles of plugs on their harnesses. They have different styles of computers that has to be mounted in different areas of the battery box. We do have a couple things that we're going to keep. This is our ignition module that we must keep in the bike. You can see here where they've added into their harness to our harness from the backbone. This is why we have to install a complete backbone harness going all the way up to our factory plugs. Our harnesses unplug under the gas tank, and they must be unplugged from the gas tank all the way back and installed correctly. Big Dog's original computers were either black with 2 connectors already pinned in. We do have a silver one that was very few years, again has 2 connectors that plug in, or the gold one that has the 2 pins connected in. We need to know whether you have the black, the gold, a silver, and a blue. Let us know which one those are and we can help you out with that as well. Depends on which model you have, whether it be a Gen 1 or Gen 2. Some will be a half plug, so you unplug one and plug the other one in, and into our new harness this one plug will work together. We'll show you that in a later update. But this particular model, we're doing a complete harness, again from the backbone all the way down into the rear. We'll also be unplugging and plugging in new tail light section as well. Wires Plus kit. This is a Wires Plus kit. Yes, it is a black computer box, but look how tiny this is compared to the Big Dog box. Quite a bit different. You have a Wires Plus kit if you have this particular box. You have a Big Dog kit if you have this particular black box. With your Wires Plus kit, we have several different wires that go to different things that have to be removed and replaced in different orders. So with that being said, on the Wires Plus kit, we have our ignition switch wire, which runs down and comes into our circuit breaker box. Now our circuit breaker does exactly what it sounds like. If our stator and rectifier go bad, our circuit breaker blows like a normal house circuit breaker. So that way we don't overcharge the electrical system. However, on this particular one, it is hooked up backwards. We have our input off of our stator and rectifier going into the top post of our circuit breaker, which is connected to everything else on our motorcycle. This is wrong. We want this pole from our rectifier by itself and nothing else attached to it, so the opposite side will pop the fuse. With this set up, it actually burns up the entire system, and that's why we are replacing this system now. We do need a jumper lead going directly to the battery off of the other side of the pole, off the circuit breaker. But everything else needs to be on the battery side and not on the rectifier side. This key switch is not the correct key switch for this. This is supposed to be a small 19 millimeter 2-wire circuit, which this one is definitely not 19 millimeters small, and it's a 3-pin circuit, and we're only going to use 2 pins. This ignition is going to be replaced and a new one installed. The timing wire or ignition wires as well here for our coil pack will be left in the bike. This does not come out. This one does not come out of the bike, off the backbone. Leave this in. If you do not have this in your bike, it will not start. Leave these wires plugged in. Our gas tank mount needs to come out in order to get the new wiring harness up the backbone. All of these wires will be removed as to install the new one, except the black wire that goes to our coil pack. This wire comes up to the backbone, comes out the backbone, and goes down into our coil pack. Leave that wire alone. If I was not replacing the key switch, we would not take the ignition coil cover off. With the Wires Plus kit, they have extra grounds that go to the battery, to the frame, all kinds of extra places. On ours, we do not ground anything to the frame. We will only ground to the battery. All the extra grounds on this bike will be taken off and not reused. If they don't want to come out with all the plugs on, we're replacing it anyway. Take them off. Due to the thickness of the powder coating, some of the holes may be a little too small. If you just run a drill bit through, a star bit through, whatever you need, sometimes they just screw right in, and it gives it enough room for you to get ready to mount into the battery tray, the ECU bracket. You have 2 screws, 2 machine screws. You always want to put the washer under the head. Put the screw in, In the kit, it will come with 2 screws, 2 washers, and 2 nuts. Where the original computer came out of the bike, well, there's the black gold. It will have 2 screw holes in the battery tray, 1 and 2. Notice I've left the ignition module in, which is still connected up through the backbone, all the way through, still comes in and then goes to our ignition coil. I have left that wire in the backbone. I left it plugged into the ignition box, and I have also left the crank sensor pickup plug all connected. It goes all the way into the bike to the front of the engine. We also have our rectifier wire still connected as well. It will be plugged back into our circuit breaker. I don't have the wiring harness in here for video show, so we want to make sure that we get our screws set into our plate. With the ignition module in there, we also want to put in our ECU mounting bolts. There's not enough room to put these in if you put them in afterwards. Once they go in, they're behind the ignition coil or ignition box, and then we will run our screws through the holes that are already drilled, so there is no drilling required to install this kit. We do not have to cut and modify any wires installing this kit. It is all plug and play. With our ECU, you want to make sure that the plug faces the battery. We don't want it in backwards. The plug will not release or catch if the plug is facing towards the bracket. We want it facing towards the battery. And just like that, we are ready to install the wiring harness. All right, so now the time to install the wiring harness. It is a very big problem. It's a common issue. People call us all the time. How do I make this work? Well, the best way that I've found is to use just a regular coat hanger or welding rod wire. We'll stick it down the backbone tube first, run it down through the center. We are going to have that issue of the bung for the gas tank. However, we'll get it out here. Make sure you bend it a little bit so it doesn't fall out while you're trying to work on it back in this area. So we know that we have all these harnesses and these wires and these connectors. They all are out here. They do not go up the backbone very easily and nicely. There are several different ways. One is you can use electrical tape, wrap it all around, wrap it on the wire. That's why I have a hook on it. It actually will grab the electrical tape and then lock it itself in place. However, the best way that we're finding out here lately is actually to use zip ties. Zip ties squish it, you can get more pressure behind it, and you will be able to pull it through all at one time instead of having big kinks and buckles inside of it. You will have to watch the bong to see if some of these terminals get caught inside the hole. If they do get caught, screwdriver down the hole, push it down a little bit, and slightly pull it through. We also use regular soapy water. Dawn is very good. You squirt it in the hole, a couple 3-4 squirts there, a couple 3 squirts here, a couple up this side, and then once I get it zip tied, I'll squirt the wiring harness itself down as well to help slide it through. So now I'm going to zip tie, but I don't want to zip tie everything up like this. We still have a huge, big problem right down here where all of these are at. So what I do is I will take some of these and I'll fold them back on themselves so that the terminals themselves aren't catching. They're actually pulling through, and to make the bunch as small as possible. I'll roll this one backwards as well. I think the rest of them will be okay. So 3 or 4 of them we just choose and we roll them backwards so that the group is not all in one big knot. So now I'm going to zip tie it down and show you the result. All right, so 30 minutes later, still can't get the wiring harness up the backbone. Turns out whoever built the frame actually put in the tank mount nut plate in, and it actually is in over 1 inch deep. If you have one of these, no matter how hard you try, you're not getting the 8-pin plugs through the backbone harness.
In most cases, the harness will run through the backbone by following the directions in this video. In the rare instance where the bung threading is too deep, skip to timecode 3825 in this video, complete the depinning instructions, then come back to this point to finish installation.
So the biggest call and concern I get is for this left-hand controls not working properly. Will they end up switching the dashboard control with the turn signal or left-hand control switches, because they both have yellows, greens, oranges in both of them? Now the easiest way to tell the difference between the two, if you don't have their tag on them, which these don't because they fell off running up to the backbone, is the dash controls are always going to have 8 pins in the terminals, where the turn signal switch only has 5. Top 4 and 1 on the back. The back one is ground. Well, that's actually our power wire. So our harnesses from our factory, to save everybody money, do not have the correct matching colored wires. As you can see on the turn signal, we do have a gray wire, we have a yellow wire, a purple wire, and a black wire coming from the original harness. Now the new harness is yellow, green, purple, yellow, and orange. The orange is a power wire coming from our ECH. ECM, however you want to call it. So that is going to be at our ground. Well, you would think it would be the ground, but it's actually a power wire that supplies the power for all of your lights. It's a weird system, but that's exactly what it does. It feeds power to them instead of takes power from them. Also on the right hand turn control, we are be looking at the same thing. We have a black wire down here that's supposedly a ground, but you can see we have an orange power wire running to it. So even if you get these disconnected, make sure that your orange wire is connected to your black wire. As you can see, we have red wires running through all the rest of them, and they don't match up here. Doesn't really matter. The right hand control switch has 6 wires coming out of the pin, out of the connector. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is right control, has 6 wires in the control. Left control only has 5 wires in the control. Dash control has 8 wires going through it, as well as our turn signals. For the front turn signal switch, you can see it really does match up pretty well. Red, brown, red, and purple. So it has 6 wires coming through it as well. But it is still, that one is the only one that's colored on color. But those are the issues that most people have, is they don't connect, make sure that these things click together. If there is an issue that that particular system isn't working, make sure we look inside and we don't have a pin that's twisted, moved over, or pushed back through when she didn't get a good connection or click from the backside when they pushed it in. Those are the biggest things that we see people not having, or having issues with, and not understanding how to fix that. But it's very simple. If they're not connecting right, take a little pin, screwdriver or something, and push that till you hear that second click. If they're bent inside there, making a bad connection, they won't work either. But it's just a very simple fix. So at the beginning of the video, I said do not take out the ignition module or the coil pack power wires. But with this harness not fitting the way it needed to fit, it was not letting me work that way correctly. So I had to install that harness again so that my coil will start and I'll have fire when we turn the bike on. But in order to do that, I went with the wire trick, the coat hanger welding wire rod trick up the backbone. Then I tied the wire with wiring harness to the wire and maneuvered it through the backbone. So now we can reattach it to our ignition module that we did not remove, because we have to keep the ignition module. If you cut the ignition module on some of the older bikes, we cannot replace that module, and you will have to build a new nose cone ignition and splice into your wiring harness. We do not have those set up. We do not have those available. So keep your ignition module as long as you possibly can, because it is not something that is easily replaced. And our colors match. Yay! Then we can pull out the excess. We'll pull out the excess as well out of the backbone. It's a lot easier to actually hide some of this wiring harness up front than it is trying to push everything back into this little tiny box and then put your side covers on. So I find that it's easier to put 6 to 8 inches of harness up front and the other half of it back here. Just makes it simpler for everything to fit. It is going to take some time to relocate everything and trying to make it match, but your gas tank sits from here to here, so you can use this entire area to hide this wiring harness and keep everything from showing. I'll show that a little bit later in the clips. Now that everything is ran through the backbone, we've kind of got everything's pushed off here to each side of the backbone, which side of the battery you want stuff hooked up to. I have now installed everything and plugged in all the pins and all the connectors and screwed down and tightened everything that we need. So first off, I installed the EHC plug to determine how much leftover wires I've got. Now I've put most of my parts on the right side of the bike, or most of my plugs on the right side of the bike, to connect down here to my speed sensor, which is a red, green, and black, a red, green, and black, connecting to the harness, goes up to the backbone and into your dash. Now it's very easy, I get a lot of calls for this, for the ignition module, which is red, green, and black as well, being very easy for this plug to be switched out with the speed sensor switch. So you have bad timing. So you can't start your bike if you don't have correct timing. So if the ignition module doesn't light up or stays lit but doesn't work properly, you're not getting fire to the right cylinder, make sure your speed sensor and your ignition module plugs are on the correct plug. As you can see, off the backbone harness is going to have a tab that says ignition module. It is yellow, red, and black. Plugs into the red, green, and black plug. Now the red and black are the only two that are correct. Again, this wire is different color off of from the factory. It will be our green plug here. So remember that the red and yellow and black plug into the red, green, and black, but not at the speed sensor side down low. It comes off of the ignition module here in the battery tray area. That's a big one that people miss as well, which is also plugged in from our backbone harness. This is the additional one that we had to add. I said to keep it in the bike, but unless you have trouble getting the harness in, don't pull it out. It stays in, it stays plugged into your ignition module, so you don't forget. We have our rear brake light switch and everything, all of our brakes, and it's another 8-pin plug. It can be routed any way you need. This has extra wiring harness, so I will actually take this apart and put it over here probably, just so that my wires aren't tight and in the way of stuff. We have a tag light plug on the bottom here as well. You want to make sure that guy is plugged in correctly. Now I have seen a tag light ground to the chassis and short circuit the bike out. So if you think you have electrical issues and you're trying to put a whole new harness in your bike, but you haven't checked your tag light, this little guy right here, unplug it and unplug it very easily, and then try to start your bike. You may have an issue with your tag because it does ground out in the tag area, on the bracket itself, inside the swing arm, even behind the battery. Sometimes it gets rubs and it'll cut right there, but then that power wire also runs the ignition module for whatever reason through the EHC, and it'll turn everything off and not destroy your bike. So that's another area to check if your bike is not powering on. Another thing that we see a lot of, this has happened 3 times in the last year and a half, is that the tack lights up on our dash do not turn on. They will flash for the first half a second and then shut back off, but our ignition module does not stay lit red. It will not switch on. It does as soon as you turn the key on for the first half a second when it's priming and testing the system, and then it shuts back off. Now how many times you turn on and off, it will not stay on because the bezel and the tack ring are shorting out. That also will turn off your EHC, which turns off your ignition module. So another thing before you replace your wiring harness and spend all this time fighting everything is to simply take the 8-pin connector that says dash on it, if you have it, which is factory ones will still have a dash on it, but it's the only one that has the 8 wires in it. Unplug it, turn your key on, and see if the bike lights up. Now you won't have any display, but you'll still have your headlight will turn on, your run and stop button will work, and then your turn signals will still continue to work, and then try to hit your start button and see if it turns on. If all of that works, then your tack ring is bad and you need to replace your tack ring. We have those in stock, whether you have an EFI bike or a carbureted bike. We have both of those in stock. So this is another thing that goes bad and then short circuits your system, and everybody wants to have a new computer put in, but it's not worth the $2,000 to install, buy the part, tear it all down and put it all back together for a simple $200 tack ring that can be installed in 30 minutes. On the other side of the bike, though, we get back to installing the wiring harness that we're just put in. We need to check out the circuit breaker. On our circuit breaker, we have it up here installed above our horn, which is a lot of them are going to be here or going to be down here up front. But either way you look at it, the circuit breaker, we need to have, that's probably a better angle, huh? Okay. So on this side, we're looking at our circuit breaker, and we want to make sure we have 3 wires on our circuit breaker. Now, if you have extra lights and extra gizmos and gadgets and stuff like that, you also want to put those on our circuit breaker as well. But you want to put it opposite of the voltage regulator that's coming in. This wire is coming off of our voltage regulator. So if it overcharges, the circuit will split here and not burning the battery up. The extra lights that we have on won't burn our EHC plug that we have here and burn up the computers, and then we're starting this all back together because our voltage regulator overcharged. So voltage regulator on the bottom circuit, everything else, all your accessories on the top circuit. Now there is another design that has 2 circuit breakers on here, and that's just an addition. It runs the same principle with a voltage regulator on one side of the pole and all your accessories on the top poles. The other thing people are forgetting to put on is this little guy right here. This is going to be our battery charger, if you will. This comes off of the voltage regulator up into our battery, down through here, up into our battery, and completes our circuit. If this wire, jumper wire, is not included on your bike or included in our kit, this is something you have to complete the circuit. So when you turn the key on, everything gets powered on. Without this jumper wire, you have nothing and will have nothing. Will not have headlights, will not have ignition, will not have dash lights, nothing. You have to complete the circuit with the jumper wire. Some of the older original kits do not have this wire in them. They are there, but are hardwired into the system. So you either cut them out of your old system or and build a new one and install it directly to your battery with your starter wire. Those are the only 2 wires connected to your positive side of your battery, the starter wire and the jumper wire. Now on our grounding situation, there are not to be any grounds anywhere else on the chassis at all. There are 2 that you're going to use. One is going to be from the EHC, and one to the transmission starter ground, which is located right down here underneath the horn on this particular model. But you do not need this ground on the chassis. If you ground it to the chassis, nothing's going to work properly. It will ground, but then you'll have issues with lights flickering, lights flashing, dash lights not lighting up all the time. So you want this wire to the primary and the starter on that bolt, on the starter bolt. That is the only ground you're going to use, besides the one coming off of the wiring harness that you just installed. It has all the grounds in the system looped into this one. So you need 2 on ground on the battery side and 2 on the positive side, and that is it. Now that we've got the wiring harness all zip tied down, we got to make sure that we keep enough space so that the gas tank will fit on it. Each bike is going to be a little bit different with the individual gas tanks and the space in between. So start with a few zip ties in the backbone and see if that will work for you guys. Check all your connections as you put it together to make sure that nothing's coming loose. Once that is checked out okay, we want to go ahead and make sure that our battery is connected. All of our grounds need to be ran to the battery. And on this particular model, since how we went ahead and installed a push button on and off switch with an alarm, we're going to have 4 grounds going to the battery, and we'll have 2 positive terminals going to the battery. Now that everything's hooked up, we can turn on our switch to see if our gauges light up. They do. We have a neutral light switch. We have our oil light sending unit is good. We have our high-low beam is working. Our horn works. Our left turn signal works. Our right turn signal works. Our hazards work. And let's see if it'll turn over. Battery's dead, but yes, it's turning over. And we also need to make sure we look at our little red light on our EHC here. Not the EHC, but the timing of the ignition module. Little red dot has to be on. Let's turn it off. Turn it back on. Everything's working as they should. Also need to check our brake lights to make sure they're working. And that looks good here. And the foot brake looks good there. Tag light is on. Horn works. Everything seems to be operational. Now, one thing that we have done is install a push button key switch and alarm that is available on our website for an extra $299.95. And we'll show you how I installed that here in just a second. "30 minutes later, still can't get the wiring harness up the backbone. Turns out whoever built the frame actually put in the tank mount nut plate in, and it actually is in over an inch deep. If you have one of these, no matter how hard you try, you're not getting the 8-pin plugs through the backbone harness. So what we're going to do is pull it back out, leave our wire up in there, and then trim out every little spot that has our 8-pin connectors. They are going to gently remove them and gently leave the wires connected, but we are going to destroy the plug. So first off, you'd want to get them loose. Next, you'll need a needle of some sort. These can be found at the clothing stores. They're just to hold all the little tiny pieces together on your clothes and your hems of your jeans or shirts or whatever you wanted they're sewing with. But these guys are what we use to stick down inside our connectors. Now, you want to be on top of the pen, and to release them, you push in the needle and pull out the wire. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times, but you get it in there far enough, you feel it pop a little bit or slide, and out the wire should come. Just like so. Now, we don't want to remove the blue collar that's holding all the wires in place, because that will actually keep them lined up in the correct order as we re-pin or re-put the new connectors on down the line. But we will do this to the front plug, we're going to do this to the two middle ones, and we're going to do this to the back one. And that should be 4 that we are going to be replacing, because once we pop these open, these break and you can't use them again. So give us a call if you do have this particular problem, and we will send out new connectors. Normally we don't have this issue. It's done and in the backbone in 15, 20, 30 minutes sometimes at the most. But in rare cases like this is 1 out of 30 that I've done, which makes this is about the 50th one I've done, because this is number 2 that I've found that this is the only way it's going to work. Alright, so got the pins all unpinned. As you can see, I left the blue seal on all the wires so that I know which way to plug in the wires when I put the new connecting on. So after this, we want to make sure and protect the ends. So now it is time for our electrical tape. Tape everything up. Make sure the ends are taped up nice and neat. You break off one of those little pins and you're looking at a lot of trouble, which is not a big deal. I can still get you the right pins and the connectors with a phone call to Big Dog Motorcycles. And I am out of tape. Probably not going to have enough of this, but we're going to try it anyway. All right, let's see if that holds. If not, we'll get another batch. All right, guys, so here we got several hours worth of work. I ended up having to get rid of the wire that was leading through. I've split the wires into 2 groups. That way I could actually get it around the fuel tank bong, because somebody put in one that is 3/4 of an inch instead of 1/2 inch. So it would not allow the wiring harness to go through the backbone tube. So several hours of time went through this. I ended up using WD-40, and I took off all the 3 pins and all of the 8-pin plugs. So the only plugs I left on were the 2 pins, and then used black tape and WD-40 to move it up and down the tube. I did have to end up cutting the sheeting, and I will repair the sheeting in several little tiny places. So make sure you double check your wires so that you didn't catch any sheeting, and we don't want to arc inside the backbone when we finally hook up everything. So now I'll be reinstalling the connectors. I did leave the blue insulator on them. That way I know exactly which position each wire will be going back into the pin. I did lose all of my identification numbers with everything going through there, all the liquids and fluids I put in there. So I will go, and once I get the connectors on there, I will show each location of each connector and the color of wires to help us understand where we need to connect if we do lose all of our information on them. So that's my next project, putting it together. It did take me 4 hours to install this, which is not normal. Usually within 1 hour to 2 hours you're done, but this one is definitely one of the worst ones I've ever had to complete. So next break we will show you how to correctly install and connect the connectors to different wires, because they do not match from the factory to our old controls. After a quick inspection, we did find that we did have one torn wire, so I went ahead and soldered it back together and put some heat shrink in it so that it will not ground out during riding. So now is install all of our new plugs, and like I said, I will go through each one and show you the color matches, what position they are. But one thing about our plugs that we do need to remember is that we can't use two of the spacers, and we also need to make sure that when we put our wires in, they click. Sometimes you can't hear them, but you can feel them. Want to make sure that we get each one, if they're rounded out at all, we need to make sure that get them flat and straight as possible so they click and set in to the locks so they won't back out while you try to start your motorcycle. So first thing is get the right rotation, the right clock. The wheel turn and spin inside the group, but they all need to be facing the same way, with the lock side up or down, but they have to come in and lock into the little tiny grooves inside here. Everything will come out at the bottom hole on each row and not the middle hole or the top hole of each row. There's 2 rows. Always on the bottom hole of the row. If you're lucky, you can do all of them at once, but not very often are you lucky. You want to make sure that they're pushed in all the way. If they are not pushed in all the way, you will not make a good connection. You can see inside some of them.
Sideways just a little bit.
Not all the pins are pushed in completely. That will be an incorrect connection, and at times it will shut off, or you'll lose your turn signals. Then you're going to be mad because you have to dig your gas tank off to figure out which plug's bad. So the best thing to do, take a little Allen wrench, get on the back side of the connector of the pin, and push them down until you hear a click. Feel the click. Again, look at your connectors, your pins, make sure they're all the same length. And once they're all the same length, I can see I got 1, 2 that are not completely in, so now I've got to push them back down again. And I've used flathead screwdrivers, little tiny blades, I've used needles, I've used Allen wrenches. Whatever it takes to get in there and push them down. Nope, didn't click that one. Let's look at why. Sometimes they bend, so we need to straighten them out a little bit more. Got it that time. Looks like they're all the same length. But this one pin doesn't look straight, so we're going to push it up a little bit in the bottom right hand corner so that our connection will be a good positive connection. That looks good. Let's make sure it's not going to pull out. Nope. Okay. And then we need to reset our seal back in place, or the insulator. It does take a little bit of work. Make sure we didn't knock any wires loose. And we're done with one.